Old Testament reading this morning comes from Joshua, but we're going to read a lot more than just one verse. So we'll actually start in the 3rd chapter, and we'll read all the way through to the 4th chapter, verse 10. So if you'd like to follow along with me, you can grab your Pew Bible and follow this really, really interesting story. So we start in the book of Joshua, chapter 3. Early in the morning, Joshua rose and set out for Shittim with all the people of Israel. And they came to the Jordan and lodged there before they passed over. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priests, then you shall set out from your place and follow it, that you may know the way you shall go. For you have not passed this way before. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, a distance of about 2,000 cubits. Do not come near it." And Joshua said to the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." And Joshua said to the priests, "Take up the ark of the covenant and pass on before the people." And they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. And the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And you shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant. When you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan." And Joshua said to the people of Israel, "Come hither and hear the word of the Lord your God." And Joshua said, "Hereby you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is to pass over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man. And when the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan shall be stopped from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap." So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and when those who bore the ark had come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water — the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of the harvest — the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap far off at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were wholly cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho. And while all Israel were passing over on dry ground, the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, 'Take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight.'" Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe, and Joshua said to them, "Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you, when your children ask in time to come, 'What do those stones mean to you?' Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever." And the men of Israel did as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, as the Lord told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to the place where they lodged and laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. For the priests who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan, until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
And our New Testament reading is from the book of Luke, chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. After this, the Lord appointed 70 others, and sent them on ahead of him, 2 by 2, into every town and place where he himself was about to come. And he said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray therefore the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go your way. Behold, I send you out as lambs in the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and salute no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace be to this house.' And if a son of peace is there, your peace shall rest upon him. But if not, it shall return to you. And remain in the same house, eating and drinking what they provide, for the laborer deserves his wages. Do not go from house to house. Whenever you enter a town and they receive you, eat what is set before you. Heal the sick in it and say to them, 'The kingdom of God has come near to you.' But whenever you enter a town and they do not receive you, go into its streets and say, 'Even the dust of your town that clings to our feet we wipe off against you. Nevertheless know this, that the kingdom of God has come near.'" The word of the Lord.
So the Luke passage says there are 70 of them, which is about how many are in our sanctuary this morning. So look around really quick, see what 70 people look like. That's about 70. And they were gathered, just like us. And Jesus was instructing them about a project that they were about to begin, just like us. Like I said earlier, it's Vision Sunday, right? It's the second Sunday of our Momentum campaign. Our Momentum campaign is meant to build momentum. Brilliant. So each week we focus on a different part of what is a healthy and vibrant church. Last week we focused on hearing from God. We started there, right? We started about listening to God rather than the details about the building project, because the church is people and not buildings. The 72, it was interesting that the RSV says 70. The other translation that I read was 72, so let's say 70 for today. The 70 that gathered that day with Jesus were listening for instructions for their journey. And Jesus tells them essentially two things: pack light and pass the peace. If you pass the peace, it will land on those who are open to receiving it. If it doesn't, don't take it personally. Pack light, pass the peace. It's really simple instructions for going into the unknown, because if you were me, or if you're like me, I would want a little bit more detailed instructions than pack light and pass the peace if I'm going somewhere I've never heard before, right? So the Israelites were going into the unknown. Now Moses had led the people out of slavery and into the wilderness, and Joshua was now leading them from the wilderness into the promised land. And the people were camped at Shittim that day. They've actually camped here before. In the book of Numbers, there's a story about the Israelites camping in Shittim. And apparently the last time that they were here, they had intermarried with the local tribes, which is indicative that they wanted to settle. They were done. I'm done traveling. Let's marry. Let's stay here. We don't know where we're going anywhere, so can we just stop wandering, right? God was not happy about that because they had not reached the promised land yet. And so God actually commanded Moses to kill many of the people right there in Shittim. So the wilderness journey was filled with loss and confusion, and what seemed to be walking around in circles, which many of us would say that the road to building a new sanctuary has also been like walking around in circles. But God was with them when they walked in those circles. For the ancient Israelites, God was with them in the presence of the Ark of the Covenant, right? You guys know this. It's a box that was constructed to hold the tablets on which the commandments were written. And the Ark traveled with the people. So when the people set up their camp, they pitched actually a special tent for the Ark of the Covenant. So there they were at Shittim, for the second time, at least. That's how many we know. Maybe there were more, right? Their tents were pitched. Their children are playing around. Their food was being cooked over a fire somewhere. And there was hunting and foraging going on, we can assume, day after day after day. And little by little, over this course of the wilderness, people had grown. New babies were born. Fathers and mothers died. Aunts and uncles cared for nephews and nieces. Nieces and nephews had to care for their aging relatives. In the wilderness, they had learned to trust, right? This walking in circles had actually made them into the people that God intended them to be. So although they were camping in the same place that they had been before, they were not the same people that they were the last time they were there, right? I mean, that makes sense to all of us. The river was full, it says. It was harvest time. The fruit was ripe, and so were the people. And it was time to cross over. So Joshua calls the priests forward to carry the ark. And he says, you go first. And so they stepped carefully. 1 foot, 2 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet into the ark. Just like when they were escaping slavery, by the way, the waters began to hold up against the ark. And the people began to cross over one at a time, children holding on to adults and adults carrying their belongings. Now when they arrived on the other side, did you hear it? Joshua picked 12 men to go back into the middle of the river, right where the priests were holding the ark. And he says, pick up 12 stones from the middle and bring them back. And Joshua set up a memorial there, a circle of stones. The best known circle of stones are in the British Isles, right? Stonehenge, for example. Circles of stones have been created as gardens, as cemeteries, as altars. They serve to remind us of something. So the stones remind us of the story reminds us of the people remind us of God. That's kind of how it goes. Like I said, this is the 10th anniversary of my ordination. I was just thinking, I think the first sermon I preached here was actually Moses crossing the river. I'm going to go back and look, because that's weird. Not intentional. So I was ordained the Saturday before World Communion Sunday. That's how I remember it. And I've been reflecting on these circles that we've been walking in the 10 years that I've been here, right? Because all of us walk our own circles, and then we as a people also walk a circle. And so, if you would indulge me, I'm going to create my own circle of stones this morning. A circle of stones that will remind us of how God has been with us in our past, so that we will know that God will be with us in our future. And so, you're going to help me create it. If you have been baptized, or have had a child baptized in the last 10 years, raise your hand. I want you to look around to see, too, right? Really? Like there's some people I don't know who were baptized. So my first baptism was Melanie Hunter. She wasn't a baby. My first was a non-baby. And so I'm going to have Nancy come and stand in the aisle by where she is to represent all of the baptisms we just saw. Let's make a circle. If someone in your life, if someone has died in your life and the church has been there for you, praying for you, or if you had a funeral for someone in your family in the last 10 years, raise your hand.
Here or anywhere?
Anywhere, 10 years. Yeah. So, I'm going to ask Vivian. I didn't tell everyone that I was going to ask them, but I picked particular things that I remember. And so Vivian is going to represent some deaths that we've experienced when her husband died. It was particularly difficult. If you have served as a deacon anywhere in the past 10 years, raise your hand. I was going to have Alfred, but he's not here. So I'm trying to think of someone on this side who has been. end, why don't you stand right where you are? Steve's in the middle. Debbie, you don't have to raise your hand anymore. So the deacons to me represent how we care for one another. And some of these things are things I know that are meaningful to you too, but to me, they're like big learnings as pastor, right? My first ordained experience, right? That I can care for a lot of people, and I do pastoral care, but it actually is way more important that a church cares for their own. So she's going to represent us caring for one another. If you have encountered a diagnosis that struck you hard in the past 10 years, raise your hand. And so the first person I told that Pete was diagnosed with MS was Lori Jarvis. And so I'm going to ask her to stand to represent how you guys have all cared for us. I started in September and Pete was diagnosed in November of the same year. Now, it hasn't all been, our stones are not all about what's happening in our congregation, right? There's been tragedies in the world, to name a few. The earthquake in Haiti happened in the last 10 years, the tsunami in Japan, the shooting in Newtown, and many others, right? And so, if you don't mind, Phil, would you represent, because Phil works on our alternative gift market, which is kind of our way to take care of a lot of places in the world that are really ravaged by tragedy. Can you maybe stand up here? Thanks. Anywhere around you'd like. Sure. If you have served as an elder in the past 10 years, raise your hand. You have not been an elder. If you've been an elder, great. So the gift of elders to me is to have a group of people who speak the truth to one another, who are able to disagree, who are able to figure things out. And Janice was an elder when I first arrived. And so would you stand up for elders, Janice? That's 6. 6 in my stone circle. If you participated in any committee who helped us choose to merge, would you raise your hand? Any committee that helped us merge. Who was on the JET, the very first one? Peter, would you stand and represent that? I was going to ask Steve Lobos to stand, because he was the first person to say out loud we should do it. Talk about moving into something you have no idea where you're going, right? If you have served on the Wellness Center in any way, starting it, helping it, on the board, or served in it, raise your hand. Marion, could I have you stand to represent? If you have a special need, if you would consider yourself a person who has special needs, physical, mental, or developmental, raise your hand. Yeah. And so, Michael, would you stand where you are?
Yes.
Thank you. If you are under 40, raise your hand. Under 40 years old. Are you afraid to raise your hand? I was under 40 when I started. I'm not exactly sure where we're allowed. So I say this, you don't have to raise your hand. I was under 40 when I started, and I'm not anymore. But the leadership of the church is acutely aware that we are building a church for the next generation of people. That's really important for us to remember when we pick our building and when we design it and things. And so Melissa, who is helping us on the Momentum campaign, would you stand and represent people who are under 40? I want to add, I actually don't know why we laughed. I think it's important. Oh, everyone would be 40. I get that, totally. We were at a Presbyterian meeting recently, maybe sometime in the last 8 months, and someone made a motion that whatever committee they were forming would have at least one person under 40. It actually took a long time for us to find someone on a Presbyterian level that would want to serve that way. And I was one of the few churches that actually had people under 40 in their congregation, which is, I think, very important for us to realize. If you have moved, bought a home, changed jobs in the past 10 years, raise your hand. Yeah. I'm going to have Mike stand up and represent that. Mike, the other Mike. So the truth is that we live in an incredibly transient area of our country, right? People have come and people go, and that is a truth in church. It's just a truth. I have one more stone, right? If you have driven someone to church who cannot drive themselves to church in the past 10 years, raise your hand. Nancy Varga. Will you stand right there? It's part of our stones. A really important thing I learned is that it takes a lot of energy to get people to gather together. A lot of work to get people to gather together. And so look around. This is my circle of stones, right? 10 years of learning and growing as a pastor, 10 years of seeing what actually a healthy congregation looks like, right? So the stones that I chose to remember are baptisms and deaths, illness and tragedy, caring for one another, serving one another, doing something we didn't know how it would come out, being with people who are different than me, building a church for people who come after me, allowing people's lives to change and grow around me, and helping each other get together. The most important thing about my circle of stones is that it's made of people and not stones. And these people and everything they represent is how I know God is with us, and how God has been with me, and how God is with you. Thank you, please. So the stones that Joshua placed at Gilgal did the same thing, right? They reminded the people that God was with them. Scholars believe that this crossing of the Jordan became actually a ritual, that people would reenact it to remember it. And if you're interested in engaging in something like that, the interactive class is actually going to reenact that story today. We have rituals, right, to remind us that God is with us and what God means to us. We have a ritual that we'll engage in today, right, the Lord's Supper. People all over the world will sit at this table. And as Reformed people, we actually believe that our ancestors in the faith are actually with us at the table. We believe it's this mystical thing, that we're seated with them and they're actually telling us stories by sitting at the table with them. They're seated with us. We're seated with them. Did the first communion look like this? No, probably not. Did the crossing of the Jordan happen exactly like that? Probably not. But when our children ask, and this is one of my favorite lines of the Bible, it's only a few times, when your children ask you, why do we sit at the table? Then we can tell them, Jesus ate with his friends. He was with them, and he is with us. You know, when our children ask us, why are those stones there? We can tell them, God was with our ancestors when they crossed over into the unknown, and God was with them, God will be with us. And so let's take Jesus' advice, and we pack light, and we pass the peace. And I know we've already done that, but I want you just to turn to the person next to you and tell them that God is with us. The choir can come forward to invite us to the table.
Stop.